Mr. Lee out first, so he won't have to suffer in prison. Seeing the senior students actively leveraging their connections to rescue and visit the teacher, Charles Justice couldn't help but feel lost and useless. He had no choice but to return to the dormitory and sit in a daze. Peter Justice hurriedly asked him what was wrong. Charles Justice, disheartened, said, "The senior students are all finding ways to save Mr. Lee, but I'm powerless. No money, no connections. Am I really this useless?" Peter Justice quickly comforted him, saying, "Young master, you practice martial arts. You could break into the prison and rescue Mr. Lee." Hearing this, Charles Justice lightly knocked on his head and said, "You're really thinking wildly. With my mediocre martial arts skills, breaking into a prison would likely cost me my life before I even rescue him. Even if I did manage to save him, then what? Would we let an elderly man die with us in a foreign land?" Peter Justice scratched his head, unsure of what to do. Charles Justice, feeling frustrated, realized that the Imperial Academy was also on break. He decided to visit Mr. Lee and called Peter Justice to join him. The two left the Imperial Academy. Initially, they intended to visit the prison where Charles Scholar was held, but neither of them knew where Mr. Lee was detained. Along the way, they asked many people but received no answers. The master and servant wandered aimlessly along the main road and unknowingly arrived at the gates of Clear Peace District, East Grand Avenue. Charles Justice stopped and looked toward the gate of Miss Williams' house, which was tightly shut. Peter Justice couldn't help but ask, "Young master, didn't you say we were going to visit Mr. Lee? Why are we at Miss Williams' house?" Charles Justice replied, "I just wanted to take a look since we're passing by." "Is that not allowed?" Peter Justice said, "But Miss Williams is already engaged." "Young master, you shouldn't entertain such thoughts anymore," Charles Justice said. "I don't know why, but even though I know Miss Williams is engaged, I still feel unsettled." Peter Justice said, "I understand now. Young master, you're worried that Lord Williams is arranging someone else for you. But you haven't passed the exams yet. Isn't it a bit too early to think about this?" Charles Justice sighed. "You're right. Let's go somewhere else." Peter Justice cautiously suggested, "Young master, since we're already here, how about going in for a rest and a cup of tea?" At that moment, a woman's voice suddenly came from behind them. "Indeed, since you're here, why not come in and sit?" The two quickly turned around and saw Lily Carter returning from shopping. She took out an exquisite box of makeup and said, "I just bought some powder for the young lady. The shopkeeper even gave me a small extra box. It's so pretty. The young lady will surely love it." Charles Justice hesitantly asked, "Is your lady doing well?" Lily Carter replied, "My young lady is doing very well. This morning, her fiancé, Mr. Chi, came to visit. She was very happy, but Mr. Chi only discussed matters with my master and then left in a hurry with him." The young lady was a bit upset. Peter Justice, puzzled, asked, "Why is that?" Lily Carter said, "I'm just a maid. How would I know? But the young lady did ask Mr. Chi about your young master." Charles Justice, hearing this, felt secretly delighted but maintained a calm demeanor, saying, "What's there to ask about me? I'm still the same as always." Lily Carter said, "Miss, you don't know what still the same means. Let's go inside. The young lady will surely be very happy to see you both." With that, she invited them into the house. Charles Justice, eager for the opportunity, quickly led Peter Justice to follow Lily Carter into the grand courtyard of the Williams family. The courtyard was filled with rare and exotic flowers, and the three imposing tiled houses exuded an air of grandeur. It was clear that the Williams family was wealthy and prestigious. Lily Carter remarked, "The master is out and hasn't returned yet. Only the old madam and the young lady are at home. I'll take you to meet the young lady." Lily Carter led them past the main house to the backyard, where they saw an open space. There, Miss Williams was dressed in a short robe, practicing swordsmanship. Though her technique was ordinary, her movements and swordplay left Charles Justice secretly astonished. He hadn't expected a refined young lady like Miss Williams to practice swordsmanship, and moreover, her elegance while wielding the sword surpassed that of many men. After finishing a sequence of sword moves, Lily Carter quickly greeted the young lady and said, "Miss, the cosmetics you requested have been purchased, and I've also brought 2 friends to meet you." Miss Williams sheathed her sword and approached them. Initially, she appeared displeased, but upon seeing Charles Justice, she smiled and said, "So, it's my savior who has come. Please have a seat. I heard from Master Chui that you've stopped attending classes." Charles Justice quickly replied, "Yes, Teacher Lee was taken away by a minor official, and all the senior students are busy trying to rescue him." Miss Williams remarked, "No wonder Master Chui came to see my father. It seems he wants to use our family's influence to help rescue his mentor." Charles Justice couldn't help but wonder to himself, what kind of power does the Williams family possess? Could they truly rescue someone from Victoria's grasp? Chapter 8, Meeting the General Luoyang, Clear Peace District, adjacent to the Williams family estate in the backyard. The head of the family, Edward Williams, was a descendant of a distinguished clan from Guangzhou. Although he did not hold an official position in the court, he maintained numerous connections with the imperial government. Charles Justice, seeing Miss Williams practicing swordsmanship, was secretly amazed. He had never seen a woman wield a sword before, let alone such a beautiful young lady in her prime. He found himself staring in awe until Lily Carter called out to him, snapping him back to reality. By then, Miss Williams had already stopped her practice, approached him, and invited him to sit at the stone table, instructing Lily Carter to prepare tea. Once Charles Justice was seated, Miss Williams sheathed her sword and asked, "Why do you have time to visit our house? Don't you have classes today?" Charles Justice promptly replied, "Teacher Lee from the Imperial Academy has been taken away by the court, so we can no longer attend classes." Miss Williams nodded and said, "No wonder Master Chui hurried to find my father, claiming it was for an urgent matter. He left early this morning and still hasn't returned." Charles Justice asked. Suspiciously, "Mr. Lee was arrested, and all the senior students have started taking action, planning to bail him out." Miss Williams countered with a question. "Then why aren't you going with them?" Charles Justice blushed and replied, "They all have money or connections. I have neither money nor connections, and I don't even know where Mr. Lee is being held. By the way, you came looking for your uncle. Does your uncle hold an official position in the court?" Miss Williams answered, "My father is just a commoner. He doesn't hold any official position in the court." At this moment, Lily Carter brought over 2 cups of tea and said, "Although my master doesn't hold an official position, Miss Williams' aunt works in the inner court, and her brother serves as a deputy general under General Wing. Both are high-ranking officials." Miss Williams quickly interjected, "Don't listen to Lily Carter's exaggerations. Although my aunt works in the inner court, we don't even know what she does. As for my brother, he's only a guard under General Arthur Wing. Recently, he returned to the capital with General Wing from Jade Gate Pass." Hearing this, Charles Justice became even more astonished and said, "I didn't expect Miss Williams to have a brother who's a general. Is your swordsmanship taught by him?" Miss Williams replied, "He spends most of his time stationed at the border with General Wing and rarely comes home. My swordsmanship was taught by my father. In fact, my aunt's skills are even more impressive, but I've never met her. I only know about her from what my father has told me." Charles Justice, still puzzled, asked, "If Miss Williams knows martial arts, why didn't you save yourself when I rescued you?" Miss Williams smiled and said, That horse was running too fast. I couldn't react in time. Charles Justice carefully recalled the situation. When the horse charged forward, Miss Williams had pushed Lily Carter aside, and he ended up saving Miss Williams. However, Miss Williams could have easily jumped aside after pushing Lily Carter. He asked, "So, after you pushed Lily Carter aside, you could have avoided it yourself. Why didn't you?" Miss Williams smiled and replied, "If I had dodged, the horse would have trampled you instead. I didn't expect you to step in and save me." Peter Justice and Lily Carter were equally astonished upon hearing this. Charles Justice said, "For Miss Williams to risk her life to save someone in such a dangerous moment truly moves me. I feel so useless. I'd like to ask Miss Williams to take me to meet your brother." Miss Williams asked in confusion, "Why? Do you know my brother?" Charles Justice replied, "No, this is the first time I've heard you mention him. I just feel like I've been unsuccessful in my official pursuits. I have no family background and no wealth. If I fail the imperial exam, I plan to join the military. Now that I know about your brother, I hope to enlist under him in the future." Miss Williams said, "Being a soldier is not easy. Every time I hear that the Tang dynasty is at war with another country, my whole family worries about my brother. A soldier's life is always in danger." Lily Carter said, "The young master is highly skilled in martial arts. He will be fine." Miss Williams replied, "That's not the case. When two armies clash, it's not about comparing the martial skills of individuals, but the commanding abilities of generals and the number of soldiers. No matter how skilled one is, they cannot stand against thousands of enemy troops." Charles Justice nodded repeatedly and said, "I've also heard the private school teacher mention that a victorious general isn't necessarily the most skilled in martial arts, and someone with unmatched martial prowess isn't guaranteed to win every battle." They chatted in the backyard for an hour, but Mr. Williams had yet to return. As the sky turned to dusk, Charles Justice bid farewell to Miss Williams and left the Williams family with Peter Justice. The two master and servant found a small roadside eatery for dinner before hurrying back to the Imperial Academy. Miss Williams promised to take him to meet General Wing and her brother the next day. Just the thought of being with Miss Williams made Charles Justice so excited he could hardly sleep. At that moment, Victor Grace returned from outside, and Charles quickly inquired about Mr. Lee. Victor Grace sighed and said, "From what I've heard inside the palace, Mr. Lee's arrest is likely Victoria eliminating the old Tang officials. I'm afraid Mr. Lee might not escape misfortune," George Ceremony said. "Right now, the only option is for Mr. Lee to take a step back and voluntarily retire to his hometown. That might remove the threat he poses to Victoria. Perhaps then he could preserve his life and enjoy his old age in peace." Victor Grace, after listening, said, "Then I will find a way to inform Mr. Lee so he understands the senior official's intentions." Charles Justice lamented, "All the senior students have connections, status, or at least wealth in their families, but I have nothing. I don't want to be an official anymore." George Ceremony, hearing this, said, "Why would you give up your bright future because of that? Even without connections or wealth, you can still be a good official." He then gave an example. The former Supreme Judicial Court Minister, de Rengier, came from an ordinary background. But he studied diligently and constantly improved his abilities. The court recognized his talent and began to entrust him with important roles. Today, Minister D serves as the Grand Governor of Southern Command, a high-ranking official overseeing a vast region. You are still young. As long as you work hard, you too can have a promising future." Charles Justice said, "But Mr. Lee has been taken away. How can we continue studying?" George Ceremony replied, "The Imperial Academy was established by the court. Even without Mr. Lee, the court will still appoint a knowledgeable person to teach you." Charles Justice nodded in agreement. At that moment, John Justice returned from outside, followed by other students gradually arriving. John Justice said, "I've heard from Illumination Prison that Mr. Lee was not coerced into confessing." Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but he added, "However, that's no place for an ordinary person to stay. The prison is filthy and reeks, with rats and cockroaches everywhere. We must rescue Mr. Lee as soon as possible." George Ceremony said, "For the sake of your future and career paths, you should not get involved in Mr. Lee's matter anymore. I will contact the court officials to handle it together. While Mr. Lee has not yet been freed, you all should focus on self-study. Moreover, each of you must submit an essay arguing Mr. Lee's innocence as homework." All the students hurried back to their dormitories. Mark Steele immediately asked, "Junior Justice, how are you planning to write your essay?" Charles Justice replied, "I haven't thought about it yet. There's still time." In truth, he had no intention of writing it at all, as he was eagerly waiting for tomorrow to meet Miss Williams' brother. Early the next morning, after Lord Wing had left the Imperial Academy, Charles Justice had Peter Justice stay behind to impersonate him. He sneaked out of the academy and headed straight to Miss Williams' residence. Lily Carter opened the door, and upon reaching the main hall, he saw Edward Williams and his wife present. He quickly bowed to greet them. Mr. Williams invited him to sit down and said, "I heard from my daughter that you no longer wish to pursue a career in government." Charles Justice nodded and replied, "I am concerned that I lack connections and background, making it difficult to be a good official. Moreover, Miss Williams mentioned that her elder brother is serving as a guard under General Wing. I wish to meet him to prepare for enlisting in the military." After hearing this, Mr. Williams said, "Young man, you must focus wholeheartedly on whatever you do. If you are distracted or indecisive, it will be hard to achieve great things. Becoming a soldier is no easy task either. My son has risked his life alongside General Wing, achieving countless military merits for the nation. Yet, General Wing was summoned back to the capital by Queen Victoria without any reason. General Hank Tiger, who once pleaded for Willow, was executed by Queen Victoria. General Wing and General Tiger often join forces to fend off the Turks, but it seems even they cannot escape misfortune." Charles Justice said, "Mr. Lee has been arrested, and I can do nothing to help. Now I realize how powerless a scholar truly is." Mr. Williams responded, "If you don't want to pursue a government career, that's fine, but it's best not to join the military either. Find a more stable occupation instead." Charles Justice replied, "If I don't become an official or a soldier, I truly don't know what else to do." Miss Williams interjected, "Father, please stop nagging. Scholar Justice has his own plans. It's getting late, and we still need to visit my elder brother." Edward Williams nodded in agreement, and his wife advised, "Daughter, when you meet your brother, tell him to come home if he has time. He should also consider getting married and starting a family." Miss Williams replied, calling Lily Carter and inviting Charles Justice to leave the Williams family estate. They rented a carriage and headed toward the temporary residence of Arthur Wing in the southern outskirts. Inside the carriage, Miss Williams and Lily Carter introduced the young man to General Wing and Ethan Williams. Arthur Wing, the younger brother of Empress Wing, the first wife of Emperor Gozong, was a master of military strategy and skilled in commanding troops. After Empress Wing and consort Shao were falsely accused and harmed by Queen Victoria, Arthur Wing was frequently sent to the frontier to battle foreign tribes. When there were no conflicts, he was stationed at the border. This time, due to Robert Rising reporting to Queen Victoria that his defenses were inadequate, Arthur Wing was summoned back from Jade Gate Pass. Without a residence in the capital, he temporarily stayed at the home of Ben Wing, his clan brother who served as a director in the Supreme Judicial Court. Ben Wing had been demoted to the frontier due to the Willow case, but had now returned to the capital. Ethan Williams, also known as Ethan, had joined the military at the age of 16, always following Arthur Wing. Rising from a low-ranking soldier to deputy general, he was now 30 years old. The first wife of the Williams family had passed away early, and Miss Williams was born to her stepmother. The carriage stopped in front of an ordinary house in the southern outskirts. Miss Williams led them down and instructed the coachman to wait. They approached the building, but the guards, though familiar with Miss Williams, still stopped them. Miss Williams explained the purpose of their visit, and one guard quickly went inside to report. Shortly after, he returned and invited them in. As they entered the gate, another soldier escorted them to an annex. At the doorway, they saw two men in armor examining and commenting on a painting hanging on the main hall's wall. The shorter man was without a helmet, while the taller one wore an iron helmet. Upon hearing the soldier's report, both turned around. The helmetless man appeared to be in his 50s, with a weathered face and graying temples, yet his demeanor exuded authority and determination. The man with the helmet was a young man with thick eyebrows, large eyes, a high nose, and a wide mouth. Most striking was a large scar extending from the corner of his right eye upward, giving him a fearsome appearance. The scar was only a centimeter away from his eye. This young man was Miss Williams' elder brother, Ethan Williams. Seeing his sister arrive with another man, he asked, "Why are you here? And who is this gentleman?" Miss Williams quickly introduced everyone. Arthur Wing glanced at the young man and nodded, saying, "It seems scholars all share a certain resemblance." He then turned to Miss Williams and added, "Indeed, the Williams family is a noble lineage, and Miss Williams stands apart from other women. Please, carry on with your conversation. I shall not intrude on your reunion." With that, he instructed the soldiers to serve tea before turning and leaving. Ethan Williams removed his helmet, invited everyone to sit, and asked, "Why hasn't young Master E come along?" Miss Williams hurriedly replied, "Teacher Lee of the Imperial Academy has been detained by the court, and young Master E is busy handling the matter to rescue him. This senior classmate of his is a friend from the same academy. He heard that you are a general, and asked me to bring him to meet you." Charles Justice also spoke. "I apologize for my bold visit. I merely wish to learn about life in the military. If I fail the imperial examination, I plan to enlist." Ethan Williams, upon hearing this, responded, "You are still young and have yet to understand the unpredictability of life. General Wing has fought countless battles throughout his life, yet now, in his old age, he has been summoned back to the capital." Charles Justice replied, "But isn't returning to the capital a good thing? There's no need to risk one's life on the battlefield anymore." Ethan Williams gave a bitter smile and said, "If it were a peaceful retirement, it would indeed be good. I only fear that General Wing's life is now in grave danger." Charles Justice still didn't understand, so Ethan Williams stood up and said, "Enough, there's no point explaining this to you. Let's take a walk to the backyard. I'll let you experience some simple martial arts techniques." Miss Williams quickly stood up and followed. Ethan Williams led everyone to the backyard, which turned out to be an open space that had been transformed into a simple and narrow practice ground. Inside, there were targets set up, and both corners of the walls were lined with an assortment of weapons. Lily Carter remarked, "Mr. Justice also knows martial arts. I wonder whose skills are superior, his or the young master's." Miss Williams interjected, "Lily Carter, don't joke around. Martial arts can be dangerous, and someone might get hurt." Ethan Williams then said, "I can see from your stance and movements, senior brother, that you've been practicing martial arts for years. How's your skill in horseback archery?" With that, he casually grabbed a bow and handed it to Charles Justice, saying, "Try shooting an arrow." Chapter 9. calamity descends from the sky. The backyard of the temporary residence of General Arthur Wing, on the outskirts of South Luoyang. Ethan Williams, noticing that Charles Justice was also a martial artist, wanted to test his horseback archery skills. However, since there was no horse in the backyard, he handed him a bow to shoot an arrow instead. Charles Justice took the bow, and immediately felt it was heavier than the ones he had used at the Imperial Academy. It was naturally harder to control. Closing his eyes, he recalled his past hunting trips in the mountains, then opened them, placed the arrow, pulled the bowstring with all his strength, aimed at the bullseye, and released. The arrow flew straight and hit the target dead center. Lily Carter couldn't help but applaud, and Miss Williams was equally delighted. Satisfied, Charles Justice returned the bow to Ethan Williams, who then casually grabbed an arrow, drew the bow without aiming, and released it. The arrow also struck the bullseye. Just as Charles Justice was about to express his surprise, Ethan Williams tossed the bow aside and threw a cavalry saber toward him, saying, "Come on, let's spar a little." Miss Williams hurriedly pulled Lily Carter back. Charles Justice caught the cavalry saber and felt it was quite heavy, though it didn't feel natural in his hands. He glanced at what weapon Ethan Williams would use, only to see him gesture and say, "Come on, make your move." Charles Justice quickly gripped the cavalry saber tightly, steadied his footing, and signaled his intent to strike. His body surged forward as he delivered a move called "Four Splits Manhwa," slashing toward Ethan Williams. Inside the house, Arthur Wing pushed open a window to watch them. Ethan Williams didn't dodge. As the heavy blade was about to strike his arm, he raised it to block the blow. A metallic clang rang out, and Charles Justice was stunned. Could his arm really be forged from iron or bronze? Yet Ethan's body remained unscathed, without a single drop of blood. As Charles Justice stood in shock, Ethan Williams pulled out a pair of metal rods from his sleeves, gripped them tightly, and coldly said, "Take this, boy." He then launched an attack toward Charles Justice. Although the bronze cudgel is a blunt weapon, the tips of this pair of cudgels are crafted into sharp points. They are heavy and wielded with a storm-like force. Charles Justice quickly mustered his strength to block the attack and leaped backward, panting heavily. He then executed a series of moves from the continuous blade technique. His martial skills, however, were only practiced as a form of relaxation during his reading breaks, leaving him neither proficient nor accustomed to blade techniques. Furthermore, the weapon felt unfamiliar in his hands. As a result, after only a few moves, flaws became evident. The continuous blade technique, originally developed by a woodcutter inspired by chopping methods, consists of few moves and lacks lethality, making it more suitable for sparring than combat. After exhausting the technique, Charles Justice clasped his hands in defeat. Ethan Williams withdrew his cudgels and said, "I know you're not skilled with blades, but when facing a powerful enemy, you won't have the luxury of choosing your weapon. If you don't carry a weapon you're familiar with, you'll undoubtedly suffer in unexpected encounters." Charles Justice listened attentively and gained much insight. At that moment, a voice came from behind him. Arthur Wing spoke. "However, this young man has potential. If you teach him with dedication, in less than 3 years, he could become a master of close combat." Everyone turned to look and saw Arthur Wing stepping out of a room. He approached Charles Justice, pulled a book from his chest, and said, "This book contains various weapon designs and basic techniques. If you plan to enlist, you might want to study it first." Charles Justice quickly accepted the book, bowed respectfully, and said, "I will remember your guidance, General Wing." Arthur Wing replied, "I dare not call it guidance. I am old now, and the future of the nation relies on young people like you to carry the burden. If you can find a true master to train you, your prospects will be even brighter." Miss Williams interjected, "He's just a scholar. Can he really become a martial arts expert? Arthur Wing nodded and replied, I've heard of a scholar in Chang'an named Tyler Black, whose martial arts skills are extraordinary. Unfortunately, he did not follow the righteous path. Charles Justice was secretly astonished. He recalled the 3 elders he met at Fragrant Mountain Temple, who had also mentioned the name Tyler Black. Who was this person truly? At that moment, a soldier hurriedly arrived to report that an imperial decree had been sent, summoning them to receive it. Arthur Wing immediately turned and headed to the main hall. Ethan Williams said to the others, Wait here, I'll go see what's happening. In the main hall, 2 eunuchs were reading the imperial decree aloud. The decree stated, Arthur Wing failed to defend Jade Gate Pass and is implicated in the rebellion of Hank Tiger and Willow. He is hereby dismissed from his position and ordered to commit suicide. Arthur Wing listened, startled but unsurprised. Many of his old comrades had already been executed by Queen Victoria, and he had long anticipated his own fate. He raised his voice and said, I accept the decree, but I hope you will spare my family. One of the eunuchs coldly replied, Rest assured. As long as you comply with the decree, your family's lives will be spared. Arthur Wing said, I hope you all keep your promise. After speaking, he removed his helmet, drew the sword from his waist, and prepared to take his own life. At this moment, Deputy General Ethan Williams stepped forward to stop him and said, General Wing, you have not committed a grave offense. Why does Victoria want your life? A eunuch nearby immediately channeled his internal energy, cautiously staying alert. The eunuch reading the imperial decree said, This is all Victoria's command. I am merely following orders. I hope General Wing, for the safety of your family, will quickly end your life. Ethan Williams pulled out a pair of bronze batons from his sleeve, shielding Arthur Wing, and said, I don't believe it. Victoria is simply eliminating dissent. Arthur Wing stopped him and said, Don't do this. Charles Justice also came running from the backyard, hiding beside the room to observe. He saw Ethan Williams swing his bronze batons at the 2 minor officials. The official reading the decree immediately stepped back and shouted, Are you rebelling? The other eunuch stepped forward swiftly, using his whisk to entangle the bronze batons. Ethan Williams tried to pull them back with force, but they did not budge. Arthur Wing urgently said, Stand down. Ethan Williams, listen carefully. From this moment on, all your military positions are revoked. You are no longer my subordinate. After speaking, he drew the sword from his waist and took his own life. Charles Justice and Miss Williams couldn't help but cry out, while the 2 minor officials turned their gaze toward Arthur Wing. Ethan Williams released his grip, tears streaming down his face. Ethan Williams quickly rushed forward to hold General Wing, only to find that he had already passed away. The 2 minor officials stepped forward to check his breath, then turned and left. Faced with this sudden calamity, Ethan Williams was at a loss. Charles Justice quickly said, General Wing probably knew he couldn't escape Victoria's treachery. She truly is eliminating dissent. Miss Williams said, General Wing is gone, and you no longer have a position in the military. Why not come home with me? Ethan Williams coldly replied, Though General Wing has dismissed me, my mission is not yet complete. Let me finish what I must do, and then I will return home. You all go home first. Charles Justice, meeting General Wing for the first time, never expected such a tragedy and felt deeply troubled. Miss Williams called him, and Lily Carter. The 3 left the residence together, boarded a waiting carriage, and headed toward the city. The carriage stopped in front of Clear Peace District. Charles Justice took his leave and returned to the Imperial Academy. Miss Williams led Lily Carter back home. Edward Williams and his wife, after hearing their daughter recount the day's events, were both secretly alarmed. Mrs. Williams exclaimed, It seems her words have come true after all. Miss Williams quickly asked, Has Aunt already visited our house? What did she say? Old Master Williams hurriedly concealed. No, your mother is just speaking nonsense. Your aunt is so busy every day. How could she have time to visit our house? You've had a long day as well. Go back to your room and rest. After dinner, I'll have Lily Carter call for you. Miss Williams returned to her room suspiciously. Edward Williams immediately whispered to his wife, This matter must not be known to our daughter. Otherwise, it will implicate her. His wife, Margaret Williams, a proper lady of noble upbringing, did not argue but softly replied, But I'm worried Ethan will also get dragged into this. What should we do now? Edward Williams said. According to Dr. Victoria is only targeting the old officials. Arthur Wing, being the Queen Wing's brother, is bound to be eliminated sooner or later. Now that Ethan has been dismissed from his position, this is General Wing's way of protecting him. Once this storm passes, everything will settle down. Charles Justice returned to the Imperial Academy, where Peter Justice hurriedly greeted him, anxiously saying, Young master, something terrible has happened. The senior students have all gone to the palace gates to petition for Teacher Lee and haven't returned yet. Charles Justice urgently asked, What about Supervisor Wing? Has he returned yet? Peter Justice replied, After noon, Supervisor Wing came back briefly. When he heard that the senior students had gone to petition, he immediately went out again. He left a message for me to tell you not to leave once you return, as he has something important to discuss with you. The master and servant duo first returned to their dormitory. Sitting on the bed, Peter Justice asked again, Young master, did you and Miss Williams meet with General Wing and young Master Williams today? Charles Justice, feeling slightly tired, lay down on the bed and replied, Don't even mention it. Just as we met with General Arthur Wing and young Master Williams, the Imperial envoy arrived to deliver General Wing's death sentence. Peter Justice was utterly shocked upon hearing this and exclaimed, What? General Wing was sentenced to death? What crime did he commit for the court to execute him? Charles Justice couldn't provide a clear explanation and simply replied, I don't know the full story either. There are some things you won't understand now, but you'll understand when you're older. Peter Justice pouted and said, But I haven't even had dinner yet. How am I supposed to grow up? Hearing this, Charles Justice realized he was also hungry, having been so preoccupied with General Wing's situation that he forgot about dinner. He got up and said, Perfect timing. I haven't eaten dinner either. Let's check the kitchen to see if there's anything left to eat. Since classes were on break, Old Chu, the cook, had taken leave to visit his home in the southern outskirts of Luoyang. Charles Justice grabbed an oil lamp to lead the way. The Imperial Academy was pitch black after nightfall, devoid of its usual liveliness. The two groped their way to the kitchen, opened the door, and approached the table, checking each cupboard and basket but finding no food. At that moment, they heard hurried footsteps outside, accompanied by the sound of a wooden shelf toppling over. Charles Justice immediately whispered sternly, Who's there? Peter Justice quickly hid behind him. Charles Justice set the oil lamp down, grabbed a wooden stick, and went outside to investigate. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew out the oil lamp. Peter Justice, frightened, covered his mouth tightly. Charles Justice softly reassured him, Don't be scared. I'll go take a look. Stay here and don't wander off. Peter Justice trembled as he nodded in agreement. Charles Justice fumbled his way to the door in the darkness. As soon as he stepped out of the kitchen, a spear thrust straight toward his chest. Startled, he quickly raised his wooden staff to block the spear. Upon closer inspection, he saw a man holding the spear and lunging at him again, shouting. So there really was an ambush. Hearing the voice, Charles Justice thought it sounded like Mark Steele. He hurriedly used his wooden staff to deflect the long spear and shouted loudly, Senior Brother Steele, it's me, Charles Justice. The other man paused upon hearing this, lowered his spear, lit a fire starter to illuminate the area, and looked closely. So it's you. You scared me. I thought it was someone coming to arrest me. Charles Justice quickly called Peter Justice to come out and lit an oil lamp. He asked, "What happened? Who is trying to arrest you?" Mark Steele replied, "We went to the gates of the Imperial Palace to petition on behalf of Master Li. Unexpectedly, the soldiers guarding the gate called Deputy Minister of the Imperial Guard Xian Yang to disperse us. We clashed with them, and Xian Yang ordered the Luoyang Prefecture to send people to arrest us. All the senior brothers were captured. Luckily, I escaped quickly and made it back." Hearing that all the senior brothers had been arrested, Charles Justice grew anxious and said, "What should we do now? Master Li has been arrested, and now even the senior brothers. Does this mean the Imperial Academy is finished?" Mark Steele retorted, "What nonsense are you saying? Isn't Director Supervisor still working hard to resolve this? The senior brothers will be released soon. I've been through this kind of thing many times before." Peter Justice interjected, "I'm so hungry." Mark Steele said, "I was too busy running for my life, and haven't eaten either. Is there anything left in the kitchen?" Charles Justice shook his head. "No, Old Chu must have taken the steamed buns home to eat." Mark Steele said, "It's fine. Let's go out and grab something to eat." Charles Justice hesitated. "Aren't you afraid the constables will catch you?" Mark Steele replied, "The constables only arrest people on the spot. They don't pursue it afterward. It's not a big deal." They left the Imperial Academy and went to a small nearby eatery to order noodles. #### Chapter 10. The 10th chapter, Hell on Earth. The next morning, before they had even woken up fully, they were roused by Master Wing. George Ceremony, his eyes red with urgency, exclaimed, "Get up quickly. Mark Steele is waiting at the gates of the Imperial Palace for Phoenix Pavilion's Robert Lee to finish court. I've already informed him. He will take you to the Luoyang Ministry of Justice prison to retrieve the captured students. Charles Justice, you will come with me to Illumination Prison to fetch Master Lee." After hearing this, the two were overjoyed. Charles Justice hesitantly asked, "Can Master Lee return now?" George Ceremony nodded and replied, "You two get ready quickly. I'll prepare as well. Let's meet at the gate." Charles Justice hurriedly washed his face and went to the door. There, he saw Lord Wing already waiting. The two boarded a carriage and rushed to the north gate. It turned out that the Illumination Prison was located near the northwest corner of the northern gate of the Royal Palace. Originally, this place was an abandoned barracks of the Imperial Guards, later borrowed by Robert Rising to serve as the Illumination Prison. The place was heavily guarded. Charles Justice, feeling anxious, stepped out of the carriage and followed George Ceremony toward the prison's gate. At that moment, the sound of galloping horses came from behind. A clerk shouted loudly, "Lord Wing, please stop." Hearing this, the two quickly turned around and saw a clerk riding a horse, chasing after them. The clerk dismounted, panting, and said, "Lord Wing, Master Destiny Lee urgently seeks your presence. Please take my horse and head to the Phoenix Pavilion to meet him." George Ceremony said, "If Master Lee is looking for me so urgently, something must have happened." He instructed Charles Justice to stay there and wait for his return. Then he mounted the horse and rode toward the royal palace. The clerk also turned and walked back to the palace. Charles Justice remained where he was, feeling uneasy as he noticed the guard stationed nearby. His eyes fixed on the plaque above the main entrance, which bore the words, "Illumination Prison," in bold script. He thought to himself, "This truly is a place of doom." While he was deep in thought, someone suddenly shouted, "Charles Justice, so it's really you." Another voice chimed in, It's truly him. What is he doing here? Charles Justice felt that the voices sounded somewhat familiar. He raised his head to look and saw two clerks in green official uniforms stepping out of the illumination prison, questioning him sharply. Upon closer inspection, he recognized them as John Farmer and Tom Shepard. While he was still surprised, John Farmer said, "The capital is indeed small. We meet again." Charles Justice asked in confusion, "It's you too? Why are you wearing official uniforms?" Tom Shepard smugly replied, "Since you refused to write the complaint for us, we found someone else to do it. Not only were we not punished, but Lord Rising even granted us official positions." John Farmer said, "Isn't that because Lord Rising and I share the same surname?" Charles Justice sighed inwardly and said, "People like you becoming officials? Officials these days are truly worthless." John Farmer responded, "Since you're already here, let us host you. Come inside and take a look." Charles Justice quickly replied, "No, I'm waiting for someone here. I won't go in." Tom Shepard said, "You can wait inside just the same." With that, he and John Farmer grabbed him. Charles Justice immediately struggled to resist, and John Farmer swung a punch straight at his face, which Charles Justice dodged by tilting his head. John Farmer exclaimed, "Oh wow," and said, "I didn't expect you to resist. Let me teach you a lesson you'll never forget." He then rolled up his sleeves and aimed a slap at Charles Justice's face, while Tom Shepard cheered him on from the side. Charles Justice quickly grabbed John Farmer's wrist and said coldly, "Even as an official, you can't just hit people as you please." John Farmer, now enraged, said, "I'm an official now. I'll hit whoever I want. You dare offend me? You deserve this beating." He then forcefully pulled his hand back, clenched his fist, and threw another punch at Charles Justice. Tom Shepard, standing nearby, clenched his fists, ready to join in at any moment. Charles Justice dodged swiftly, found an opening, and caused John Farmer to miss his punch. With a light push, John Farmer stumbled into Tom Shepard, and the two of them staggered before standing back up, their faces flushed with anger. Charles Justice secretly chuckled but suddenly noticed them drawing their swords and pointing them at his neck. At that moment, several cavalrymen approached from outside, led by a tall, thin man with a Sichuan accent who asked, "Do you need help, brothers?" John Farmer replied, "No need." Seeing this, Charles Justice reluctantly raised his hands in surrender. He was escorted by the two men into Illumination Prison, where he saw numerous prisoners being held. From inside, he could hear waves of anguished screams, sending chills down his spine. John Farmer smugly sheathed his sword and led him into an interrogation room. The room was dim and reeked of decay. The deeper they went, the louder and more frequent the prisoners' cries became, leaving Charles Justice visibly shaken. After passing through the holding area, they arrived at a large room with a burning brazier. Various torture devices hung on the walls, and several ragged prisoners were being tortured, their screams echoing through the air. The stench of blood was overwhelming. Charles Justice muttered softly, "This place is terrifying." John Farmer said, "Out of respect for our old friendship, I'll tell you about the punishments here. Once you're in here, you'll definitely have a taste of something delicious." Only a slab of stone, just enough for one person to lie on, could be seen. Above it hung a green rock, and beside it lay a large hammer. John Farmer said, "This is called the skull-splitting stone. Lie down on it, and you'll find out whether your head is harder or the stone is." Charles Justice, hearing them mock him, felt a surge of anger, but had to suppress it, unable to show his emotions outwardly. Nearby, a shirtless jailer was using a bamboo stick to stab the fingernails of a prisoner, who screamed in agony, making it unbearable to watch. John Farmer and Tom Shepard then showed him the torture method called 100-vein seal, where they hung a prisoner with ropes and pierced their acupoints with steel needles. The pain was so excruciating that most prisoners confessed, unable to endure it. Even those who gritted their teeth in resistance would faint from the pain, only to be revived with cold water and tortured again until they confessed. Another form of punishment involved a specially crafted device that twisted the prisoner's limbs backward, dragging them across the ground. Every pull caused unimaginable pain. These were just the initial punishments. Later, Leonard Stone and Edward Cross devised 10 extreme tortures, named as follows: 1. 100-vein seal. 2. Breathless agony. 3. Earth-shattering howl. 4. Bone-crushing burden. 5. Soul-scattering fear. 6. Real copper twist. 7. Reverse reflection reality. 8. The sorrow of dead pigs. 9. Seeking death of offspring. 10. The ruined seeker. John Farmer and Tom Shepard, seeing Charles Justice trembling with fear, laughed arrogantly, satisfied with their intimidation. After enduring such brutal torture, prisoners were often either dead or permanently disabled. Even if they died from the torment, there was no escape. John Farmer led him further inside, when suddenly, a blood-soaked prisoner appeared ahead. Half of his face was gone, exposing white bone, causing even John Farmer to shudder. Charles Justice tried to calm himself and said, "What you're doing here is extracting confessions through torture. Even if the prisoners confess, it's because you forced them." John Farmer, unbothered, replied, "We also have methods that don't involve torture, yet still make prisoners confess." Tom Shepard added, "Don't you know? Master Stone came up with a technique where prisoners are forced to stand continuously. They can't sit, can't sleep. If they fall asleep, they're immediately woken up. If they sit, they're dragged upright. No one in Illumination prison can endure it for more than 2 days without confessing. That's how Charles Scholar from the Imperial Academy confessed." Charles Justice, shocked, exclaimed, "So that's it. This place truly is hell." John Farmer coldly replied, "Indeed. I've given you a tour of hell. Shouldn't you be grateful to me? If you ever end up here, I might even take care of you." Tom Shepard chimed in, "Look at Brother John Farmer's greatness. We won't hold grudges for how you treated us before." Charles Justice then asked, "So Charles Scholar from the Imperial Academy confessed. Does that mean he'll be released from here?" John Farmer nodded and said, "Yes, he can leave, but someone will have to carry him out." Charles Justice, confused, asked, "Did standing for too long leave him unable to walk?" Tom Shepard replied, "No, Charles Scholar committed suicide." Charles Justice, both horrified and furious, cautiously probed, "Do you know who accused him?" John Farmer said, "As Lord Rising mentioned, it doesn't matter who accuses anymore. As long as Victoria agrees, no one can save him." Charles Justice responded briefly, "I see." John Farmer glared at him and said, "If you have nowhere else to go right now, you can come work with me. You're literate, and I won't treat you unfairly." Charles Justice quickly shook his head. Tom Shepard angrily interjected, "Don't refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. Brother John is giving you face. Don't be ungrateful." John Farmer added, "It seems these punishments have scared you. Go home and think carefully. Once you've decided, come find me." At that moment, George Ceremony's voice was heard from outside. Charles Justice quickly turned to look. George Ceremony shouted loudly, "Charles Scholar has already confessed. Why would he still commit suicide?" A junior clerk with a black mole snapped, "How would we know? You can go ask him yourself." Charles Justice hurriedly ran toward George Ceremony. When the two met, they already knew about Mr. Lee's suicide. Though enraged, the man was already gone. They had no choice but to claim Charles Scholar's body. The two rented a carriage to transport the remains back to the Imperial Academy. At this time, Mark Steele also used money to bail out the detained senior students. Together, they bid farewell to Mr. Lee's remains. Later, they found a plot of land in the outskirts of the capital to bury him. Before sealing the coffin, Charles Justice changed Mr. Lee's clothes and discovered blood-written words inside his robe. "Take care of my family." He couldn't help but feel deeply moved and showed it to everyone. George Ceremony recounted Charles Scholar's life. Charles Scholar had been a doctorate holder during Emperor Taizong's reign, once serving as the Zhongchuling. Later, during Emperor Gaozong's rule, he was selected as the Crown Prince's tutor due to his vast knowledge. He taught the Crown Prince in Luoyang, guiding him in governance. However, after Crown Prince Zhang Huai was deposed and demoted to commoner status, Charles Scholar was removed from court and reassigned to the Imperial Academy. Teachers at the Imperial Academy held no official rank, but received court stipends. Charles Scholar's hometown was Eternal in West Mountain. After Charles Scholar's burial, George Ceremony gathered Mr. Lee's belongings and instructed Victor Grace to travel to West Mountain. His mission was twofold: to inform the family of Mr. Lee's passing and to deliver monetary condolences. Since returning from Illumination Prison, Charles Justice felt increasingly disillusioned with studying, believing it to be futile. Yet, joining the military didn't seem like a viable path either. What road was left to take? He couldn't help but feel lost, resenting his lack of martial prowess. If only he were stronger, he would have eradicated those villains. The court later assigned a new teacher, Mr. Danielson, to continue instructing the students at the Imperial Academy. However, Charles Justice no longer felt he could learn anything from it. It had taken great effort to finally reach a day of rest. Luoyang had entered April, and the weather was already stiflingly hot. He invited Peter Justice to accompany him to the Williams family estate, ostensibly to gather information about young Master Williams, but in truth, to visit Miss Williams. The two master and servant left the Imperial Academy and walked along the main road. Luoyang felt that the streets seemed somewhat different from when he had first arrived, though he couldn't quite pinpoint what had changed. He only noticed that there were more petty officials dressed in blue official robes, carrying iron shackles, and apprehending people everywhere. Frequently, criminals were paraded through the streets for public shaming. When the two reached the outskirts of Clear Peace District, they saw a large number of petty officials gathered there. Even in front of the Williams family residence, a few officials stood guard. This sight only deepened his suspicion. Just as he was about to step forward and inquire, he noticed a woman passing by who cast a glance at the Williams residence. Upon seeing the officials guarding the entrance, she quickly turned to leave, but was immediately stopped by a petty official shouting, "Who are you? Seize her and question her." One of the officials stepped forward, capturing the woman. She trembled in fear, repeatedly begging, "Please spare me, my lord." Charles Justice quickly looked over and recognized the petty official as Mark Smith, the same man who had arrested Mr. Lee. Mark loudly interrogated the woman, asking what connection she had to the Williams family, and why she had hurried away upon seeing the officials. "Are you feeling guilty about something?" he demanded. Charles Justice's heart sank. "This is bad. Could something have happened to the Williams family?" He hid in the shadows, observing the Williams residence. Sure enough, no one seemed to be entering or leaving. He quickly called Peter Justice to follow him, as they circled around to the backyard of the Williams estate. There, they spotted a woman wearing a conical hat and carrying a long sword, seated at a nearby tea shop and quietly sipping tea. When she noticed the two of them, her eyes flashed with a cold, piercing light, causing Charles to instinctively lower his head. Chapter 11, Episode 11, Rescuing the Williams Family. Behind Clear Peace District in Luoyang was a secluded street with little foot traffic. A woman wearing a conical hat sat at a tea stall, sipping tea, with a long sword by her side. Noticing Charles Justice glancing toward the Williams family's backyard, she grew wary and tightened her grip on the sword. Charles Justice caught her sharp gaze and quickly lowered his head. He immediately sensed that something had happened at the Williams residence. Anticipating potential trouble, he instructed Peter Justice to return to the Imperial Academy on his own. He added, "If I don't return by tomorrow, go home and tell my parents to take refuge for a while." Hearing the seriousness in his tone, Peter Justice anxiously asked, "Young master, what exactly happened at Miss Williams' house? Isn't Mr. Williams a general under General Wing?" Charles Justice replied, "Don't ask any more questions. Just do as I say and leave now." Reluctantly, Peter Justice said, "Then please be careful, young master. If you can't win, run. If you can't escape, beg for mercy." Charles Justice tapped him lightly on the head and said, "Go quickly. Stop rambling." Just as Peter Justice turned to leave, a young man wielding a blade blocked his path. Both master and servant were startled. Charles Justice instinctively wanted to resist, but realized he was unarmed. The young man, fair-skinned and clean-shaven, had a strikingly handsome appearance. However, as he drew his blade slightly from its sheath, the glint of the steel made Peter Justice back away in fear. "Who are you? What do you want?" Charles Justice asked hurriedly. The young man spoke in a low voice. "I should be asking who you are, and what you're sneaking around here for." He pressed the blade against Peter Justice's neck, sending a chill down the boy's spine. Charles Justice quickly said, "Don't harm him. He's just a child." The man dragged both of them into a small adjacent shop, a general store whose owner was nowhere to be found. The interior was cluttered with wooden goods. Charles Justice glanced around, hoping to find something he could use as a weapon. But before he could act, the man ordered them to squat down and coldly interrogated, "Who are you? What are you doing near the Williams family's backyard?" Charles Justice hastily replied, "What Williams' backyard? We were just passing through." The man immediately drew his blade closer to Peter Justice's neck, prompting Charles Justice to shout, "Wait! Spare him. I'll talk." The man stared at him with icy eyes and said, "You'd better tell the truth, or his head will roll." Glancing at Peter Justice, Charles Justice said, "We came to find Miss Williams. But when we saw guards at the front, we decided to take a detour to the back to see if there was another way in." The man pressed further, "What is your relationship with Miss Williams?" Charles Justice replied, "Miss Williams and I are just ordinary friends. I've only met her a few times." The man revealed a fierce expression and said, "The Williams family has been detained by the imperial court. Anyone associated with them must die, so you must die too." As he spoke, he swung his blade down. Charles Justice quickly rolled on the ground, saving Peter Justice from the blade, and grabbed a wooden stick nearby, sweeping it toward the man. Unexpectedly, the man halted his blade midway, and, seeing the wooden stick coming, immediately used his weapon to block it. Charles Justice urgently told Peter Justice to run ahead. The man sneered, "I didn't expect you to have some skill. Take a strike from me." With that, he slashed again. Charles Justice used the wooden stick to block, but after a few exchanges, the stick was chopped in half, nearly injuring his hand. At a critical moment, the opponent's blade was already at his neck. Charles Justice hurriedly said, "You can kill me, but I have one last request." The man scoffed, "What makes you think you have the right to make demands?" Charles Justice quickly replied, "I just want to meet Miss Williams one last time before I die." The man coldly said, "Stop dreaming. Accept your death." At that moment, a woman who had been drinking tea outside stepped in and said, keep them alive for now. Charles Justice realized they were all part of the same group and felt both shocked and disheartened. Shortly after, a man wearing a straw hat entered the scene and coldly asked, "What's going on here?" Charles Justice found the voice familiar. He quickly looked toward the speaker. The man also glanced at him, and upon recognizing him, said, "He's an acquaintance. Let him go." With that, he removed his straw hat, revealing himself to be Ethan Williams. Charles Justice exclaimed in surprise, "Young Master Williams, it's you. What on earth is going on?" The woman looked at Ethan Williams and asked, "Who is he?" Ethan Williams replied, "He's a friend of my sister, not someone from the imperial court." The woman gestured, and the man immediately withdrew his blade. Charles Justice quickly pulled Peter Justice closer. Ethan Williams asked, "Why are you here?" Charles Justice explained, "I came to find Miss Williams, and also to see if you had returned. I didn't expect to see imperial guards stationed at your front gate, so I went to the backyard to check for another entrance." "What exactly happened?" Ethan Williams said, "It's a long story, but time is tight. Someone has accused me, and Robert Rising has sent people to kidnap my family to lure me out." The woman said, "Stop talking. Have your people prepared everything?" Ethan Williams quickly replied, "Everything is ready. We'll use the cannon fire as the signal." At that moment, the sound of cannon fire echoed from the main street ahead. Peter Justice asked skeptically, "Could it be the new year already?" Ethan Williams said, "We have to go rescue my family now. It's too dangerous here. You should return." Charles Justice insisted, "No, I want to go with you to save them." Ethan Williams shook his head in refusal. "But your martial skills?" Charles Justice turned to Peter Justice and said, "You return to the Imperial Academy and wait for me. Follow the instructions I gave you." The woman said, "It's time. Let's move." Ethan Williams hurriedly left the shop with her, heading toward the backyard of the Williams estate. Charles Justice quickly followed. It turned out the woman was Ethan Williams' aunt, Emily Williams, and the person who had just interrogated Charles Justice was her subordinate. The three left the small shop, their weapons gleaming in hand. They leaped over the walls of the Williams estate and entered the backyard. Charles Justice, lacking such skills, couldn't climb the wall. He rushed back into the shop, grabbed a table, placed it against the wall, and climbed on top. At that moment, Peter Justice came out of the shop and tossed him a sturdy wooden staff, saying, "Young master, take this. I'll wait for you at the Imperial Academy." Charles Justice caught the staff, nodded in agreement, and climbed over the wall. Inside, he saw a fight already underway. He jumped down and saw several officials lying lifeless in pools of blood. From the main hall came the sound of fighting and loud commotion. He hurried toward the main hall, but before reaching its entrance, a man burst out, wielding a sword and shouting, "Come quickly! Rebels are here!" At the same time, a group of officials armed with large sabers rushed forward. Emily Williams and Ethan Williams emerged from the main hall, brandishing their weapons and attacking the man. The man appeared to be in his 40s, dressed in black official robes, wielding a saber. He had a handsome face with a black beard, large eyes, and a sallow complexion. While defending himself, he said, "Ethan Williams, I've been waiting for you." Ethan Williams retorted, "George Freeman, so it was you who filed the accusation." Emily Williams interjected, "Stop wasting words with him. He's stubborn. Let's end his miserable life first." This George Freeman was once a deputy general under Arthur Wing, known for his exceptional martial skills. However, after massacring prisoners, he was dismissed by Arthur Wing and reassigned elsewhere. While Arthur Wing's downfall was not his doing, George Freeman had falsely accused Ethan Williams of colluding with Arthur Wing and continuing to plot rebellion after Arthur Wing's suicide. Ethan Williams swung his twin swords, attacking George Freeman. Charles Justice hurriedly rushed into the main hall, spotting a constable fighting with Emily Williams' subordinate, while two other constables held blades to the necks of Mr. and Mrs. Williams. However, neither Miss Williams nor Lily Carter were in sight. Seeing this, Charles Justice quickly struck the constable fighting with the subordinate on the back of the neck, rendering him unconscious. The remaining constable immediately shouted, "Drop your weapons now, or I'll kill them." Emily Williams' subordinate had no choice but to throw down his blade. The two constables smirked triumphantly, with one saying, "Get out now, or we'll kill them." Charles Justice gripped his staff tightly, pretending to throw it away, but then noticed someone jumping in through the back window. In a flash, a sword pierced the back of one constable. The other constable, unable to react in time, was also struck down by a sword. Charles Justice turned to see that the one who struck the constables was Emily Williams. He couldn't help but feel puzzled. How had she entered from the back when she was just outside the main hall moments ago? Before he could think further, Emily Williams said, "Anna, quickly find the young lady. I'll escort them out." Charles Justice discarded his staff, picked up a constable's blade, and stepped forward to cut the ropes binding Mrs. Williams. He asked urgently, "Where are Miss Williams and Lily Carter? Why aren't they here?" Edward Williams, also freed by his sister, replied, "Sarah and Lily Carter were taken by Mark Smith. You must save them." Hearing this, Charles Justice grew anxious. Emily Williams quickly asked, "Brother, do you know where they were taken?" Both Mr. and Mrs. Williams shook their heads, unable to answer. Emily Williams then said, "Anna, take them and escape through the back courtyard. We'll meet at the usual place." With that, she grabbed the unconscious constable struck by Charles Justice and stabbed his thigh with her sword, causing blood to gush out. The constable woke up in pain and pleaded, "Please spare me." Emily Williams coldly demanded, "Where did Mark Smith take the young lady?" The constable stammered, "I don't know." Emily immediately stabbed his other leg, making him cry out in agony. Desperately, he replied, "Perhaps to Lord Stone's residence." Charles Justice quickly asked, "Where is Lord Stone's residence?" Emily Williams waved her sword threateningly, and the constable hurriedly answered, "At the end of Green Bamboo Alley, just outside the East Gate." Without hesitation, Emily drove her sword into the constable's heart, ending his suffering. Charles Justice rushed to the back courtyard, and saw that Emily Williams had already exited the main hall. She called out to Ethan Williams, "You must escape. We'll meet at the usual place." With that, she dashed toward the back courtyard. Ethan Williams deflected George Freeman's blade, leapt onto the roof, and fled toward the rear. Charles Justice reached the courtyard wall, but couldn't climb over. Just as he grew worried, Ethan Williams arrived, grabbed him with one hand, and helped him up onto the wall. George Freeman and the constables pursued them relentlessly, cornering Charles Justice against the wall. Ethan Williams shouted, "I'm entrusting my sister to you. Don't worry about me. Just go." Charles Justice swung the iron rod again, sweeping it towards the group of guards closing in on him. Gritting his teeth, he leaped down from the wall and ran eastward. As soon as he exited the alley, he caught the attention of patrolling officers. Hastily, he sheathed his blade, but a group of officers quickly surrounded him. A short yet muscular officer immediately shouted, "Who are you? Why are you carrying such a large blade?" Charles Justice quickly discarded the blade and said, "I found this, and was planning to turn it in at the magistrate's office." Two officers grabbed him and said, "You look suspicious and nervous. There must be something wrong. You're coming with us to the magistrate for questioning." Charles Justice hurriedly replied, "I can't go to the magistrate. I have urgent matters to attend to." However, the leading officer waved his hand, commanding his subordinates to escort Charles Justice westward, drawing the attention of many onlookers. At that moment, 2 junior officials arrived on horseback, shouting for pedestrians to clear the way. The officers quickly stepped aside, allowing the officials to pass. Unexpectedly, one of the officials stopped his horse, looked their way, and exclaimed in surprise, "Isn't this Charles Justice from the Imperial Academy? What crime has he committed?" Hearing this, Charles Justice turned toward the voice, his expression changing. It turned out that the 2 officials on horseback were John Farmer and Tom Shepard. The 2 looked at him smugly. Tom Shepard added, "No need to take him to the magistrate. We'll take him to Illumination Prison for questioning ourselves." The leading officer immediately nodded in agreement. Hearing this, Charles Justice secretly gathered his strength, preparing to escape. John Farmer said, "Put the iron shackles on him. This man knows martial arts. Don't let him get away." One of the officers quickly took the iron shackles and locked them around Charles Justice's neck. He struggled and shouted loudly, "How can you arrest someone so arbitrarily? Where is your arrest warrant?" John Farmer immediately struck him with a whip and snarled, "If we don't have a warrant, we'll just make one up." Chapter 12, Blood and Tears. Divine capital Luoyang remained bustling and lively, but compared to usual days, there were noticeably more minor officials dressed in official uniforms, holding iron shackles in their hands. Though their rank was low, their authority was immense, and with a secret order, they could arrest anyone at will. Charles Justice was about to be taken to Illumination Prison by John Farmer and Tom Shepard. He struggled with all his might, but it was futile. The onlookers avoided intervening, pretending not to notice. At that moment, a rider on horseback galloped down East Grand Avenue. On the horse was a minor official dressed in the same uniform as John Farmer. Upon seeing them, he exclaimed, "There's an emergency in Clear Peace District on East Grand Avenue. Lord Rising has ordered immediate assistance." John Farmer, hearing this, said, "Lord Rising has urgent matters. We must go to him at once." Tom Shepard pointed at Charles Justice and asked, "What about him?" John Farmer replied, "We can't let him go. Take him along." With that, he grabbed the iron shackles, spurred his horse, and rode toward Clear Peace District on East Grand Avenue. Charles Justice had no choice but to follow behind on foot, panting heavily. At the gates of Clear Peace District, a crowd of minor officials and constables had already gathered. George Freeman was commanding his subordinates, who were in combat with a group of men wielding machetes. Freeman's underlings surrounded the opponents, but the strong men fought back desperately. Charles Justice arrived, exhausted and out of breath. John Farmer and Tom Shepard immediately dismounted, drew the swords at their waists, and charged into the fray. At that moment, a group of soldiers armed with bows and arrows approached from the west. It turned out that Robert Rising had heard that Ethan Williams had assembled a group of soldiers under Arthur Wing to rescue Edward Williams and his wife. Rising's subordinates were nothing more than a ragtag group, no match for these seasoned soldiers. In desperation, Rising sought help from Arthur Queen, requesting reinforcements from the Imperial Guards, and ordered Leonard Stone to rally all available forces. Arthur Queen used his authority to borrow 20 Imperial archers, spreading rumors of an assassination attempt. General Aaron Blacka of the Imperial Army dispatched his subordinate, Thomas Prince, with 20 archers to provide reinforcements. Mark Smith led his fierce subordinates, pressing the remaining soldiers step by step. Meanwhile, George Freeman dragged Ethan Williams forward as a human shield, shouting, "You've all been deceived by Ethan Williams. He betrayed General Wing and tricked you into rescuing his family. Now that he's captured, if you lay down your weapons and surrender, I'll spare your lives in honor of our past camaraderie." The soldiers hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Ethan Williams immediately shouted, "Don't listen to his lies. He's the one who betrayed General Wing. Don't worry about me. Run while you can." Enraged by this, George Freeman struck Ethan Williams with his sword, yelling, "Say another word, and the next strike will end your life." Ethan Williams, now wounded on his left arm and bleeding profusely, gritted his teeth and refused to yield. One of his subordinates quickly used a torn cloth to bandage his wound. Charles Justice, witnessing this from the side, grew increasingly anxious but felt powerless. He shouted, "General Arthur Wing wasn't betrayed by Lord Williams. You must believe him." Hearing this, the soldiers immediately turned their gaze toward him. George Freeman also looked over and demanded, "Who is this man? Silence him at once!" A subordinate rushed forward and slapped Charles Justice, leaving him dizzy and disoriented. The soldiers shouted in unison, "We can't trust George Freeman. Let's charge out and fight them to the death." At that moment, Thomas Prince arrived with a group of archers and urgently asked, "Who is the commander here?" George Freeman quickly responded, "I am Commander George Freeman." "And you are?" The man replied, "I am the captain of the 1st Unit of the Jade Forest Archery Unit. I have orders from General Black Crow to hunt down the assassin who killed General Wu. Is the assassin here?" Hearing this, George Freeman was momentarily stunned before pointing at the group of strong men and saying, "The assassins are over there. Shoot them down quickly." Believing it to be true, Thomas Prince immediately ordered his archers to ready their bows. George Freeman hastily commanded his subordinates to retreat, giving space to the archers. He then turned to Mark Smith and instructed, "Take a team and escort Ethan Williams and this one to Illumination Prison for interrogation." Charles Justice panicked upon hearing this. He struggled desperately, but a nearby subordinate struck him hard with chains. The pain caused him to open his mouth to scream, but before he could make a sound, a rag was stuffed into his mouth. Mark Smith promptly led a team to escort the 2 prisoners to Illumination Prison. The besieged soldiers shouted urgently, "Everyone, save Deputy Williams!" They brandished machetes and fought fiercely to break the encirclement. Thomas Prince commanded the archers to fire, and a rain of arrows descended upon the trapped soldiers. One strong man charging at the front was struck and fell. The others quickly used their machetes to block the arrows, fighting desperately to break through. These soldiers were exceptionally brave, continuing to fight even after being struck by arrows. They managed to kill several archers and break free. George Freeman immediately drew his sword, spurred his horse forward, and slaughtered the soldiers who had fought to escape. In no time, the Williams family estate was littered with corpses, and blood flowed like a river. Charles Justice gradually regained consciousness and realized he and Ethan Williams were being escorted to Illumination Prison by Mark Smith. Knowing that entering Illumination Prison meant certain death, he quickly spat out the rag in his mouth and shouted to Ethan Williams, "We can't go to Illumination Prison. It's a living hell." Mark Smith sneered upon hearing this. "Looks like you've been there before." With that, he lashed out with a whip, leaving the right side of Charles Justice's face swollen and red. But Charles persisted, saying, "If we go in, there will be no hope of survival." Ethan Williams, hearing this, began to struggle as well, but the more he struggled, the more blood poured from his wounds, staining his white garments red. Mark Smith let out a cold laugh, then spurred his horse forward. The 2 prisoners were dragged behind, unable to react, leaving a long trail of blood behind Ethan Williams. His face grew pale from excessive blood loss. Suddenly, Mark Smith stumbled and fell off his horse. His subordinates quickly reined in their horses, bringing the group to a halt. Ethan Williams and Charles Justice finally stopped moving. Charles Justice struggled to lift his head, and saw that Ethan Williams had already fainted. He crawled toward him, while Mark Smith's subordinates dismounted to check on their leader. Suddenly, the subordinates were thrown aside. An old man wearing a conical hat appeared, drawing a long sword. He moved like a black flash through the group, and blood spurted from the throats of the subordinates. Charles Justice then felt himself being grabbed by a powerful hand and placed on horseback. He saw a black light flash, and the chains on his hand shattered with a heavy clink. Sparks flew as the chains broke, and he couldn't help but feel overjoyed. He noticed Ethan Williams being placed on another horse. The old man sheathed his sword, leapt onto another horse, and led the two horses westward toward the city gates. From the sword on his back and his silhouette, Charles Justice could confirm that the old man who saved them was none other than Minister Blade William Blade. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, though he remained worried for Miss Williams. In the hall of Marshall City within the royal palace, Queen Victoria was summoning Robert Queen and Henry Black. Standing beside her was Elizabeth Queen, holding a child over 1 year old. Elizabeth Queen was the eldest daughter of Robert Queen, the wife of Henry Black, and the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. Henry Black was initially assigned to Linwu as a military governor, but after Robert Rising accused the 5 Tigers of Luoyang and other rebels of killing the Scarlet Crane Taoist at Old Chang'an Palace, Henry Black was implicated and reassigned by Queen Victoria to serve as the governor of Yu Province. Not long ago, Robert Rising received a secret report stating that the 5 Tigers of Luoyang were hiding in Henry Black's governor's residence. He immediately sent people to capture them, but Henry Black led troops to resist. When Arthur Queen learned of this, he reported Henry Black's actions to Queen Victoria. Furious, Queen Victoria ordered Arthur Queen to send forces to apprehend the 5 Tigers of Luoyang, and if Henry Black interfered, to arrest him as well. Sensing trouble, Victor Shadow quickly instructed his disciple to escort his family to the capital to meet Queen Victoria, while he led the 5 Tigers of Luoyang into hiding in the Phantom Enchanted Forest. Upon arriving in the capital, Henry Black first visited his father-in-law Robert Queen, hoping to use his wife's special status to clear Queen Victoria's suspicions about him. Robert Queen, overjoyed to see his daughter, son-in-law, and especially his now walking grandson, listened to Henry's explanation and decided to bring the entire family to the palace to meet Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria did not expect Henry Black to personally come to the palace to admit his guilt, especially with Robert Queen pleading on his behalf. Reluctantly she said, "You hail from Ho-Sha-Fi, but both Ho-Sha-Fi and the 4 demons of the western regions have escaped from prison. Currently, you have no notable achievements and are entangled with rebellious outlaws. For the sake of the Queen family, I will spare your life." Hearing this, Henry Black quickly expressed his gratitude alongside his family. Queen Victoria then said, "All of you rise. Is this your child?" She gestured toward the baby in Elizabeth's arms. Henry Black promptly replied, "Your Majesty, this is indeed my son with Elizabeth. His name is Jonathan Black." Queen Victoria, puzzled, asked, "Star and Moon? Why did you give him such a name?" Henry Black quickly explained, "This child was born to Elizabeth during our journey from Linwu to Yu Province. It was already midnight when he was born, under the light of the stars and the moon, so we named him Star and Moon." Queen Victoria, after hearing this, remarked, "Born on the road? I've heard that the Empress Wei, the consort of Emperor Tom Li, also gave birth to a prince named Guer during her journey to Junzhou. Is this true?" Sophia Grace quickly responded, "Your Majesty, it is indeed true." Queen Victoria concluded, "Women giving birth on the road seems to be quite common, doesn't it?" Everyone was stunned upon hearing this. Henry Black felt a wave of terror in his heart. What could Victoria Queen possibly mean by this? Summoning all his courage, he risked asking, "Your Majesty Victoria, may I ask a personal question? I am unsure if it is appropriate." Victoria Queen, with a noticeably softer demeanor, replied, "There are no outsiders here." Go ahead and ask. Henry Black took a deep breath and was just about to speak when Victoria Queen interrupted. You wish to ask about the situation regarding your younger brother and sister, don't you? Henry Black immediately lowered his head and replied in a quiet voice. Your Majesty is truly perceptive. Victoria Queen coldly responded. Your younger brother, Tyler Black, conspired with rebels and attempted to assassinate me. He was burned to death by Robert rising aboard a yacht on the Lakha River. Henry Black's face turned pale upon hearing this. He hurriedly said, My second brother was foolish. He deserved his fate. Victoria Queen continued, It's good that you understand. Regardless, your younger sister will no longer remain alive in this world either. Sweat began to bead on Henry Black's forehead as he quickly knelt down, not daring to raise his head. Victoria Queen added, Your sister was innocent, but she was implicated by the actions of her two elder brothers. I have imprisoned her in Heartbreak Courtyard. If you wish to see her, you may, but remember your status and hers. Henry Black immediately bowed his head in gratitude. A female official nearby found this situation puzzling. Victoria Queen then instructed her nephew, Robert Queen, to first escort Elizabeth and her child away. She then ordered, Gracie, take Henry Black to Heartbreak Courtyard to meet Arthur Black. The female official promptly obeyed, replying, Mr. Black, please follow me. On the way, Gracie asked with confusion, Mr. Black, earlier, Victoria Queen mentioned that you must be mindful of your status and Arthur Black's status. What exactly does that mean? What is your status compared to Arthur Black's? Henry Black gave a bitter smile and replied, Victoria was implying that my status is that of the son-in-law of Lord Robert Queen, while my sister's status is that of a concubine to Prince Lu Ling of the Middle Kingdom. Gracie was silently astonished upon hearing this. At the gate of Heartbreak Courtyard, Rosie Black, her hair disheveled, held her toddler daughter, who had just started to speak, and peered outside through a small window slit in the iron door. When Henry Black saw her, his eyes immediately welled up with tears. Suppressing his sorrow, he heard Gracie say, Arthur Black and her daughter are inside. Do not stay too long, or Victoria will hold me accountable. Henry Black quickly thanked her and hurried to the door, though he found himself speechless. Rosie Black, upon seeing her elder brother, was momentarily stunned. After a while, she finally said, Brother, is it really you? Henry Black couldn't speak, only nodding in response. Rosie Black quickly turned to her confused young daughter and said, Little Ling, this is your uncle. Greet your uncle. The little girl innocently called out, Uncle! Uncle! Hearing this, Henry Black's tears streamed down as he finally managed to respond with his first words. He stepped forward, clasping his sister's hands tightly. Seeing how frail and worn she had become, clearly having endured much suffering, he silently resolved to rescue her from this place. Rosie Black asked, Brother, are you well? And how is John? Henry Black nodded and replied in a low voice, Everyone is fine. Don't worry about them. I promise I will get you out of here. Rosie Black hurriedly said, No, big brother, I am fine here. I cannot leave, or it will implicate the Wing family. Henry Black was puzzled, but Rosie Black turned away and said, If possible, please thank Princess Taiping on my behalf. Henry Black felt uncertain. At that moment, Gracie also rushed over. She had overheard Rosie Black mention Princess Taiping and came to see what was happening. However, she saw Rosie retreat into her room without meeting anyone. Left with no choice, she said to Henry Black, Mr. Black, time is up. Let's return. Henry Black quickly stood up and said, Sister, you must stay strong. Hashtag Chapter 13. The 13th return reuniting with the hero. The Deep Palace is like a prison. Once confined to the cold palace, life is as good as over. Henry Black followed Gracie out of Heartbreak Courtyard and returned to Victoria's residence, the Immortal City Palace. Located not far from the Imperial Garden, this palace received plenty of sunlight, making it a favorite of Victoria. At that moment, she was reclining on a chaise lounge while Benedict Monk massaged her. Seeing them return, she merely said indifferently, "You've met your sister. You may leave now." Henry Black immediately knelt and pleaded. Nephew-in-law humbly requests aunt to release Rosie Black and her daughter. My siblings and I will be forever grateful to Victoria. Victoria replied coldly, Rosie Black is now the daughter-in-law of the Lee family. Once a daughter is married off, how can she be taken back? Henry Black quickly responded, Then I request an audience with Princess Taiping. Victoria's voice turned icy as she said, Even if you beg? Sophia, it's useless. I've already made my decision. Leave at once. Henry Black explained earnestly, I wish to meet Princess Taiping only to seek her guidance on raising children. I have no other intentions. Victoria said, If that's the case, Gracie can take you to see Sophia. Henry Black hurriedly thanked Victoria. He followed Gracie out of the Immortal City Palace, walking along the winding paths of the inner palace. Along the way, Gracie asked him, What crime did your sister commit to be imprisoned in Heartbreak Courtyard by Victoria? Henry Black gave a bitter smile and replied, My sister committed no crime. She only had the misfortune of having two unlucky elder brothers, which led to her being confined in Heartbreak Courtyard to suffer. Gracie comforted him after hearing, Mr. Black, don't blame yourself too much. Why not plead with Princess Taiping? It might work. I feel that Princess Taiping and Black Talent have an unusual relationship. Henry Black was a bit doubtful, but Gracie continued. Princess Taiping's husband, Adrian Monk, was implicated in Willow's rebellion case and was executed by Victoria's decree. Victoria also ordered Princess Taiping to reside alone at Upper Forest Garden to console herself. Upon arriving at Upper Forest Garden, where a carefree palace had been built, Gracie said, Princess Taiping resides here. She then led him to meet the princess. Ever since Adrian Monk's execution, Queen Victoria had arranged for her beloved daughter to stay here for solace. They saw a woman in royal attire, lost in thought before her dressing mirror. Gracie quickly announced, Princess, Lord Robert Queen's son-in-law, Henry Black, requests an audience. The woman in royal attire slowly turned around, revealing a sorrowful face that still couldn't hide her elegant and graceful beauty. She softly said, Wasn't he exiled by the Empress Dowager to Uzu as a governor? When did he return? Gracie stepped forward and whispered, It was Victoria who summoned him back. After visiting his sister, he requested to meet you, Princess. Sophia Grace stood up and said, Then let him in. She moved to the front of the desk and sat down. Henry Black respectfully stood and saluted, saying, This humble servant, Henry Black, greets your highness. Sophia Grace gestured for the maidservant, Tu Xiong, to serve tea and invited him to sit for a conversation. Henry Black spoke candidly. Thanks to Victoria's grace, I was able to visit my sister at Heartbreak Courtyard. She asked me to express her gratitude to your highness. Sophia Grace replied, Because the Empress Dowager wishes to marry me off to Arthur Queen, my heart has been troubled. It has been a long time since I visited her. Is she well now? A look of sorrow appeared on Henry Black's face. Sophia Grace ordered the maids to leave and softly said, Your brother once asked me to care for Miss Black, but the palace is ever changing. The fact that she has survived until now is already a blessing. Even the original consort of Emperor Zhongzong, Lady Zhao, was starved to death in the cold palace. Henry Black was deeply shocked by this revelation. In his heart, he began to calculate how to rescue his sister, regardless of whether it implicated Prince Lu Ling. At that moment, Window noticed his inner turmoil and remarked, Miss Black's presence in the palace ensures the safety of my third brother, and neither you nor your family will face trouble. Otherwise, if Miss Black were gone and the Empress Dowager's fury erupted, even your father-in-law might not be able to quell it. Henry Black replied, I simply cannot bear to see my sister and her child live such a life. Window stood up and said, Do you know that Prince Consort Erickson has already been executed by Victoria? Henry Black quickly stood and responded, I've heard about it. Is it because the Prince Consort was connected to Prime Minister Willow? Window replied, The descendants of our Emperor Gaozong are fortunate to have survived. Look at those who have fallen. How many do you think are left in this world? Henry Black dared not respond further and excused himself. Window did not stop him, but simply remarked, Your younger sister is like a fuse. Do not ignite it under any circumstances. If it explodes, it will lead to countless deaths. Henry Black left the palace and returned to Robert Queen's residence. After dinner, he and his wife retired to their room. Elizabeth asked, Husband, did you meet your younger sister today? Henry Black nodded and replied, She's living like a prisoner right now. Elizabeth, upon hearing this, said, Then I'll ask my father to persuade Victoria to release her. Henry Black lay down and said, There's no need. Victoria has already made up her mind. Besides, this matter concerns the lives of many people. Let's not bring it up for now. The next day, Henry Black and his wife strolled through the city of Luoyang. While walking along the main street, they noticed a stall selling small toys. Their son reached out, wanting one, and Elizabeth quickly asked for the price and paid for it. Nearby, a man wearing a bamboo hat was selling fresh fish. Henry Black bent down and asked, Where did you catch these fish? The man, speaking in a low voice, replied, I caught them in the rivers and lakes. I originally planned to deliver them to the 10,000 Nations Tavern on East Grand Avenue, but the owner suddenly didn't need them. Would you like to take two? Henry Black shook his head and said, The fish look good, but I can't finish them. Meanwhile, Elizabeth had already bought a small pinwheel for their son. She turned and asked, Husband, should we go home for lunch or eat out today? Henry Black said, It's been a while since we ate at a tavern in Luoyang. Let's go to the 10,000 Nations Tavern on East Grand Avenue and see if the food is still as good as we remember. Elizabeth agreed. At noon, the family went to the 10,000 Nations Tavern. The place was as lively as ever. The waiter saw Henry Black and thought he looked familiar, but with so many customers, he couldn't place him. The waiter quickly greeted them, and Henry Black asked, Is there a private room available on the second floor? The waiter promptly replied, You've come at the perfect time, sir. There's only one room left. Please follow me. They were led upstairs to the peony room, as the private rooms were named after flowers. After placing their order, the waiter said, Please wait a moment. Your meal will be served shortly. Henry Black nodded and then said to his wife, You stay here. I'll step outside and see if there are any seasonal vegetables we can buy to go with the meal. Elizabeth replied, Then come back quickly, won't you? Henry Black had just stepped out of his private room when he noticed a middle-aged man carrying a basket of tangerines. The man called out, Fresh tangerines just transported from the south, very sweet. Would the gentleman like to buy some? Henry started picking out tangerines when the man leaned in and whispered, We're being watched by the imperial court's men. I've found a way to slip out. The 5 tigers of Luoyang have been captured and are being escorted to the capital. You must find a way to rescue them. This man turned out to be none other than Victor Shadow, Henry's master, disguised as a tangerine seller. Henry asked in a low voice, Do you know where the 5 tigers will be held once they reach the capital? Victor replied, The Jiao prison, established by Robert Rising. It's a fortress, not an easy place to infiltrate. Henry nodded thoughtfully. I'll find a way to use my official identity to assist in the rescue. Victor then raised his voice for the benefit of onlookers. Would you like to try one, sir? If it's not sweet, you don't have to pay. Then, lowering his voice again, he added, Yesterday, I encountered Minister Blade, William Blade of Manhwa, on the main road. It seems he's also here to rescue someone, but it's for the Williams family. Henry peeled a tangerine, took a bite, and remarked, Not bad, very sweet. I'll take a pound. In a hushed tone he said, The capital seems very chaotic. Victor nodded slightly and whispered, Indeed. You all need to leave quickly and avoid getting entangled in others' affairs. Henry accepted the tangerines and quietly asked, What about my sister? Victor replied loudly, That'll be 1 tael of silver. Then, in a low voice, he added, The living should focus less on the departed. Your sister, though imprisoned by Victoria, isn't in immediate danger. If you try to take her out of the palace, it will undoubtedly implicate many others. I'll go find William Blade first. Don't act recklessly. Henry agreed, paid the silver, and returned to the private room to share the tangerines with his wife and son. Victor Shadow hurriedly left the 10,000 Nations Tavern, donning a conical hat as he made his way toward the Ministry of Justice's prison. Upon reaching the prison gate, he presented his official token to the guards, who promptly allowed him entry. The Ministry of Justice, also known as the Bureau of Detention, primarily managed the imprisonment of criminals. Its current overseer, Stevie Danielson, was away at home having lunch. Near a cell designated for high-profile prisoners, an old warden was drinking with another elderly man. When they saw Victor arrive, one of them stood up and asked, Mr. Lee, have you returned? Victor nodded and replied, Is this all you have for lunch? It's pathetic, no better than prison food. The old man was a short fellow, around 40 years of age, with a face full of horizontal flesh and small eyes. He said, What solutions are there? Our wages are too low, and there's no extra perks to make up for it. Victor Shadow tossed him a piece of silver and said, I'll treat you to lunch today. Go out and buy some fine wine and delicious dishes. The old man quickly replied, That's wonderful. I'll leave this place in your care, both of you. Victor Shadow sat down and poured himself a cup of wine. The elderly man across from him said, I didn't expect you to have connections with Stevie Danielson. Victor Shadow took a sip of wine and replied, It's all thanks to the Protector's connections. How do you know Manager Danielson? The elderly man raised his head, revealing his white hair and a face lined with wrinkles. However, his eyes were still sharp and full of spirit. This man was none other than William Blade. He said, Same as you. I got to know Stevie Danielson through Paul Levine. I once saved Danielson's life, and we got along well. That's why I'm temporarily staying here. This is the safest place right now. What brings you to the capital? Victor Shadow said, Through General Levine's introduction, I got acquainted with Manager Danielson. He gave me a leisurely post in the secret division, which is fine since it gives me an official identity. Previously, the secret division here was under Robert Rising's control. Now, I go by the name Droppy Lee, a drifter in the tides of life. William Blade sighed and said, The capital is in chaos these days. People are living in constant fear, and wrongful imprisonments are rampant. I've been entrusted by General Levine to rescue a deputy of General Arthur named Ethan Williams and his family. Why have you removed your mask? Aren't you afraid someone will recognize your true identity? Cindy Lee replied, There are some masks that, once worn for too long, become a habit. On the contrary, when I take off my mask, I feel unfamiliar, as if I've forgotten who I really am. Enough about me. How are things on your end? Have you managed to rescue anyone? William Blade said. I was only able to save young Master Williams and another young man. However, there's still no news of young Master Williams' parents and sister. But according to my junior, someone has already gone to save them. Once everyone is rescued, we'll immediately escort them out of the city. At this moment, the prison warden returned with wine and food, placing it on the table and inviting the two to dine. Cindy Lee asked, Warden Ha, how are the two prisoners that Senior Gale brought back? Warden Ha Fuck Khan replied, They're doing well, currently recovering from their injuries in the prison. William Blade said, Old Ha is a trustworthy man. If he weren't, he would have already defected to Robert Rising. Old Ha said, Even though I'm just a lowly prison warden, I still know right from wrong. How many of those informants are actually telling the truth? Aren't they all just trying to swindle money from the court? The old man took a sip of wine and said, Robert Rising, in his attempt to curry favor with Victoria and her nephews, went madly after the Lee clan and former officials of the previous dynasty, causing chaos in the capital. I heard the prisons are packed with detainees, not to mention that many are executed daily. William Blade said, I fear the prisons won't be enough. They might have to use the Ministry of Justice's great dungeon. Jailer Han nodded and said, That's possible, so you all better hurry and get those two out of here. William Blade replied, It's only a matter of a day or two. Once they've recovered from their injuries, and we have enough people, I'll immediately escort them out of the city. At that time, I'll need your help to prepare their travel documents. Old Ha said, Leave that to me. After lunch, Old Ha cleaned up alone, while William Blade led Cindy Lee into the dungeon to meet Charles Justice and Ethan Williams. Both were eating, but when they saw the visitors, they stood up. William Blade said, Please continue. This is a friend of mine, Droppy Lee. If you meet him in the future, you can rely on him. He's trustworthy. The two quickly clasped their hands in salute and greeted Mr. Lee. Cindy Lee noticed Ethan Williams' arm was still injured and said, No need for formalities. If you don't have a place to go, I can recommend a safe refuge for you. William Blade asked, Do you mean the Phantom Enchanted Forest? That place is too remote. Cindy Lee replied, Though it's far, it's very safe. Ethan Williams said, Right now, I'm only worried about the safety of my parents and younger sister. William Blade reassured him, Don't worry. My junior brother has gone to rescue them. They'll be fine. You'll reunite with them soon. Charles Justice added, It seems we must leave the capital quickly. I wonder if Peter Justice has already left the city. William Blade said, This place is safe for now. Your most important task is to recover. Once everyone is ready, we'll leave the capital and make further plans. Cindy Lee said, We can't just take things one step at a time. We need to think about where we'll hide once we leave the capital. William Blade said, You don't need to worry about this matter. We can head to Manhwa. First, hiding a few of them there won't be an issue. William Blade and Victor Shadow then bid farewell to the two and returned to their room. They saw that Old Ha had already tidied up the table. At that moment, a guard entered and said, A lady by the surname Williams is outside requesting to meet Mr. William Blade. Upon hearing this, William Blade quickly said, Invite her in at once. Chapter 14. The 14th Encounter, Escaping the Predicament. Amidst the chaos caused by the unruly, the Ministry of Justice was left neglected. Robert Rising, who originally hailed from the Ministry of Justice, had long forgotten his roots. Thus, William Blade chose the Ministry of Justice prison as a hiding spot. Conveniently, the current head of the Ministry of Justice, Stevie Danielson, was an old friend of his. Victor Shadow, on the other hand, got acquainted with Paul Levine, the master of Ghost Fortress, who in turn introduced him to Stevie Danielson. Paul Levine and Stevie Danielson were both from the same region, Kwanlun, and shared a similar background. One came from a family of military generals, while the other descended from a lineage of scholars. Their families even had marital ties in the past. Upon receiving Paul Levine's request, William Blade and his junior brother rushed to divine capital Luoyang. However, upon entering the city, William Blade was stopped and questioned by the city guards. He decided to let his junior brother enter first to seek help from Stevie Danielson at the Ministry of Justice. Meanwhile, Philip Gale visited the Williams family, who had just been rescued by Emily Williams, and hurriedly escorted them to safety. William Blade arrived slightly late and coincidentally encountered Charles Justice and Ethan Williams. He promptly stepped in to rescue them. Without any news of Philip Gale and burdened with the responsibility of taking care of the two rescued individuals, he temporarily stayed at the Ministry of Justice prison, awaiting news of his junior brother. Hearing that someone was looking for him, he quickly went out to check. The visitor, upon speaking, revealed a female voice. "Are you Minister William Blade?" William Blade nodded in response and presented the black iron sword as proof of his identity. He then led the young lady into the prison cell to converse. Old Ha hurriedly stood guard outside. Once inside, the young lady slightly bowed and introduced herself. "I am Anna, a subordinate of the Right Assistant Minister Williams. I was sent by Senior Philip Gale to deliver a message to you. They are currently trapped by Leonard Stone and his men at the Queen's Clan Ancestral Hall in the northeastern part of Luoyang. The Imperial Guards, sent by Victoria, are stationed there, preventing Leonard Stone from storming in. However, he has surrounded the area. I managed to escape by disguising myself as an Imperial Guard soldier." Cindy Lee, standing nearby, remarked, "It seems your junior brother has run into trouble." Anna, puzzled, asked, "Who is this gentleman?" William Blade replied, "This is my friend from the martial world, Droppy Lee, one of our own." Anna nodded in greeting and then asked, "Should we inform young Master Williams about this?" William Blade shook his head. "The injuries of young Master Williams have not healed yet. Don't tell him for now. I will go rescue them," Anna said. "But that place is currently guarded by the Imperial Guards, with Leonard Stone leading officials in a strict search. I'm afraid even entering the Ancestral Hall will be difficult." Cindy Lee, upon hearing this, said, "I have a way to get into the Ancestral Hall without anyone noticing." "Which Ancestral Hall are you referring to?" Anna replied, "Senior Philip Gale is trapped in the Queen's Clan Ancestral Hall, built by Victoria, located in the northeast of Luoyang City." William Blade asked, "Are you saying you can lead us into the Queen's Clan Ancestral Hall without being noticed? Is that true?" Cindy Lee responded, "Yes, but nighttime is the most effective. During the day, it's easy to be discovered." William Blade said, "I'm just afraid my junior brother cannot wait until nightfall. Is there any way to enter now?" Cindy Lee lowered her head, pondering for a moment, then said, "Yes, but you two will need to wait a little. I will inform my apprentice to find a way to get us inside." William Blade softly asked, "Who is your apprentice? How does he have such great skills?" Cindy Lee replied, "Please don't ask too many questions. You two should change into servant attire, find a discreet spot outside the Queen's Clan Ancestral Hall, and wait for my message." William Blade nodded in agreement and invited Anna to lead the way. Cindy Lee quickly left the Ministry of Justice prison. When Cindy Lee arrived at the 10,000 Nations Tavern on East Grand Avenue, she saw Henry Black and his family just leaving the tavern. She immediately put on a straw hat and approached, saying, "Looking at this gentleman's rosy face and bright forehead, you must be destined for great wealth and fortune. Would you like me to read your fortune?" Henry Black recognized her voice and said, Who does fortune-telling in the middle of the road? Let's talk at the tea house next door. He then led her to a small, quiet tea house nearby and ordered a pot of Bai Luo Chun tea from the owner. The two began their conversation, and Henry Black said, "Please, sir, read my fortune." Cindy Lee, speaking in a low tone, said, "Sir, your official career has not been smooth for over a year now." Elizabeth, upon hearing this, nodded repeatedly, eager for him to reveal the solution. Cindy Lee said, "You have advanced in your career thanks to your wife, but you rarely visit her parents or ancestors. As a result, your career path is not smooth. Rather than being promoted, you've been demoted." Elizabeth, realizing his words were accurate, quickly said, "Sir, you're absolutely right. Please tell me how to resolve this." Cindy Lee pretended to be mysterious and said, "Revealing the secrets of fate shortens one's lifespan." Henry Black immediately understood the hint. He took out a silver ingot worth 50 taels and handed it to him, saying, "Thank you for your efforts, sir." Cindy Lee added, "Revealing such secrets must not be known by a third party, or it will also shorten their lifespan." Elizabeth, hearing this,